Primobolan, or Metenolone Enanthate, is an anabolic androgenic steroid and a DHT derivative. This drug was first introduced onto the scene in the 1960s, and one of the rare steroids to have extensive human testing in high doses. In fact, it's the highest dose anabolic steroid that can be classified as well tolerated in clinical trials. But this drug has gotten a bad rap over the years as being a weak muscle builder. So what's the truth? Is Primobolan a weak drug? So what's the reason it's been classified as a weak anabolic steroid? Well, the reason is because we used to live or die by something called the anabolic to androgenic ratio. It's outdated science, and it purportedly stated how anabolic each compound is compared to how androgenic, obviously. That, coupled with the fact that it had been run up to 1.2 grams per week within women, led into the belief that it was a weaker compound and not really optimal for muscle building. However, when we're assessing whether Primobolan is a strong anabolic compound, we really need to look away from Trenbolone and the side effects, whether that's aesthetically or the health impacts, as a sign of strength. That's simply not always the case. My opinion may be controversial to some and not to others. Yes, Primobolan is a weak anabolic steroid. That's when we're comparing using a 19-nor, for example, in a higher, less responsible dose as a main growth promoter, or using testosterone as a main growth promoter at higher doses. But does that mean that Primobolan should be discounted as an ineffective growth promoter? Well, no, because it's far more than just milligram compared to milligram. Primobolan in high doses can absolutely compete and hang with the best of them, whether it's Trenbolone, Deca, or testosterone. But if Primo's weaker, how can that be the case? Well, I'm talking about safer use protocols. I'm talking about the amount of that drug that you can use before you see significant health impacts which would require you to top out your dosage. Trenbolone produces nightmarish side effects at just a few hundred milligrams per week, whereas Primobolan in clinical studies has been run up to 1200 milligrams. Sure, taking a milligram of Primo and a milligram of Trenbolone, there's gonna be a difference in their effectiveness, but that's not how cycle design works. Before we get into the pros and cons of Primo, let's talk a bit about the use case. When would you utilize this compound? Would it be during a bulk or during a cut? Although in reality there's no such thing as a cutting or bulking steroid, if we're gonna get technical, there still are compounds that are better suited to either or scenario. Realistically, you don't really want to use something that causes you to retain a lot of water, like nandrolone, or like dianabol when you're looking to shred down and get lean, because that's going to affect your aesthetic, and the water underneath the skin is going to make you look less impressive. If you want a dry, detailed look, then a lot of water ain't going to help you there. I've run Primobolan during a contest prep and during my off-season consistently. It is the most consistent feature in my anabolic stack, and although it brings a fullness to the muscle, which we'll get into shortly, I've seen no negative consequences in either scenario. So besides the love letter I've already written for Primo, what are the benefits? Well, being a jack of all trades, does that mean it's a master of none? Yes and no. Although it won't bring the amazing subsidiary benefits like the protein sparing effects of Trenbolone, and it probably won't even be as strong as something like testosterone as the main growth promoter, in my opinion, you need over 500 milligrams of Primobolan to really make a difference, and 700 ideally, and Primobolan is well tolerated up to 1200 milligrams, as I've stated. So you're still well within the studied range of doses for this drug when you're using it in a powerful supraphysiological growth context. And Primobolan doesn't even necessarily have to be an addition to your stack. It can be a replacement because it acts as an AI, an aromatase inhibitor. It modulates estrogen, which means that you can take out the stuff like Arimidex, which is simply causing damage to your health, and replace it with something which does the same job but also promotes growth. And with how toxic aromatase inhibitors are on their own, it could even be comparably safe, if not safer. That's not a scientific opinion at all, that's just speculation. But still, it's a no-brainer to take the damaging AI out of the stack and replace it with something that's going to do the same job but also build muscle. Not to mention the fact that estrogen itself is important for building muscle too. I very much believe in designing cycles for the highest possible reward for the lowest possible risk, relevant to your goal. The reason I say relevant to your goal is because Mr. Olympia, wanting to stay as safe as possible, is still going to have to run much higher doses than someone who's looking to achieve a much more moderate goal as safely as possible. So the AI benefits for me a really important plus. To be honest, Primobolan completes any stat. Using Primobolan as a main driver of growth enables you to utilize slightly higher doses of other drugs which do convert to estrogen, and it's easy to manage a Primobolan cycle. Honestly, the fact that estrogen is taken care of and you know that realistically it's fairly mild on your system in amounts that you can afford anyway, it makes for a carefree life. Although that may just be the positive mental benefits of Primobolan. I personally experience a fairly happy, euphoric feeling while I'm on Primobolan pretty much all the time. I feel happier, I feel uplifted, and whether that's bro science or not, other people do report that this is a feel-good compound. So there's probably something there. So, by the sounds of it, Primobolan is completely safe. Well, no. Every single drug or anabolic agent carries side effects, whether we're talking testosterone or trenbolone. At high enough doses, you will experience some negative side effects. At moderate to low doses, you could still experience negative health impacts. Any anabolic androgenic steroid is going to have an effect on your blood work and your health as a consequence. It just so happens that Primo is milder. Think of Primo like a chisel, when a 19 nor or an oral may be a sledgehammer to your system. Primo is also a DHT derivative, which does mean that it could carry some of those side effects relating to the prostate or the hairline. However, it doesn't appear to act like other DHT derivatives. In clinical studies, in fact, the amount of DHT and testosterone within the system with women taking the Primobolan at those super high doses was lower than testosterone, and the testosterone was only being used at 300 milligrams compared to 1200 milligrams of Primo. But there are two negative side effects worth mentioning. Point number one is that Primo is typically sold in lower concentrations. That means more volume of oil having to be put in your body, and daily shots are pretty much a non-negotiable. The biggest drawback of Primo? That'll be the price tag. In the best case scenario, Primo probably costs about double the amount of any other anabolic steroid milligram to milligram. And as I said earlier, technically it's weaker, so yes, that's a hefty old bill to pay. But you can't put a price on happiness. Well, you probably can, but for my own sanity's sake, I'm not going to. If you can't tell by now, I am a fan of Primobolan. My experience dictates that it is a powerful growth promoter used in the correct doses. Those correct doses are still within a relatively safe range when we look at clinical studies. It acts as an aromatase inhibitor, which removes one burden from your anabolic stack, and it does two useful jobs at once. It modulates estrogen, and it builds muscle. Primobolan sits within the holy trinity of compounds to use within a cycle for me, which we'll get into in a future video if you want to see it. If so, comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.